Hey, welcome to DevSecLead. I have Phil Bosco here. He's a penetration tester that I've met a long time ago in the Marines. And welcome to the show, Phil.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me.
So, tell me, we met, this is like our first time that we talked in, I think, 6 years, right?
Yeah, I think, it's been a long time.
Yep.
I got out about, 5.5, 6 years ago, and I think that's around the time that we met, when I was on my way out.
Yeah, I think that we met in that CISSP boot camp on Camp Lejeune, or Lejeune, whatever Marine Corps you're coming from. It depends on how you pronounce it.
Yeah, oh geez, yeah, I guess that was a little bit longer than 6 years then. Yeah, it's been a while.
So what have you been doing?
Yeah, so once I got out, I moved to the private sector. Well, I finished up my bachelor's degree. I got most of it while I was still in, and then finished it up when I got out. And then from there, started pursuing my master's degree at SANS Technology Institute, and been working in the private sector as a penetration tester.
Okay, cool. What kind of penetration testing did you do? That's a pretty broad subject, right? You have web application, you have physical penetration tests. What's your specialization?
Yeah, I got started. I really enjoyed social engineering right out of the gate. That doesn't necessarily always require a lot of technical expertise, just a know-how on how to manipulate people, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I've always been fascinated with, just reading different books from Kevin Mitnick and, the Catch Me If You Can story. Then once I really got going, I really enjoyed wireless pen testing and network pen testing. Once I started working private sector, though, I was doing a lot of subcontracting work for Rapid7 at that time. And they were throwing me on all kinds of assessments from web apps to, mobile applications. And I would tell them, hey, I have never done a web app before, or I've never done this. And that was kind of the culture that they promoted there, was just I guess cross training and helping each other out. And they're like, oh, that's fine. You've never done a web app. We'll throw you on or shadow you, with somebody else. And so it was very fast paced and always learning new things. And so there wasn't really a certain category of pen test that they stuck me into. I always enjoyed social engineering and network pen testing, but they were always throwing me on things that I had no experience with and training me as I went.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. I know a lot of guys that have gotten stuck in certain roles. Maybe they're working on an internal information security team, and they are just the web app team, or they're just the network pen test team. And so being in this role where I was consulting, pretty much a new client every single week while working with Rapid7, that really enabled a wide array of opportunity for me to learn a lot of real world skills from the various assessments and from the talented team that I was able to join at that time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But you didn't start out in pen testing. When you were in the Marines, what exactly did you do?
Yeah, I started there as a 0651 data network specialist, and I think that role has changed now since I've gotten out. But when I first started, I was stationed at a schoolhouse on Camp Johnson. And there I felt like I was a geek squad in camis. Really anything that had power going to it. We were managing the workstations. Users were locking out their passwords, and we had to unlock that in Active Directory. So we did a lot of that kind of work, a lot of patch management to make sure that all of the systems were within compliance. But that changed a lot when I got stationed on Camp Lejeune and started deploying. We would manage the wireless point-to-point links before base, between the bases, and making sure that the communications for the entire base stayed live at all times. And so, it was a very, there wasn't really a certain skill set. I felt like there was a lot of different things that we would learn. And, as part of the curriculum to be an 0651, they had me go through the first 3 modules of the CCNA courseware, and then also the A+ certification. So there was a lot of different skills there, a lot of kind of basic IT and management, server building, but then also it started leaning into information security at a lot of the times once we got deployed. So why security? You have a broad skill set already. You could have. You said you started doing technical work
help desk kind of work, helping people. What spurred the move to pen testing? Because I mean, you're going from one range, one end of the spectrum to another, literally in IT.
Yeah, I guess I've just always had a passion for cybersecurity and bending the rules and seeing what's possible with that. I remember when I was, I don't know, I might have been 7 or 8 at the time, and my parents had this flashy new computer, 166 megahertz, a whopping 2 gigabyte hard drive, and a CD-ROM drive. The possibilities were endless with the games that I could play on that thing. And they would leave for work and they would put a password on the computer because they didn't want me playing games while they were gone at work all day or wherever they were off to. And I really wanted to play my games, and we didn't have internet yet at that time. And so I remember I called into Microsoft support, and I pretty much social engineered them into teaching me how to bypass the password on my parents' computer. And I wasn't doing anything malicious, I mean, at least I didn't think so. I just wanted to play my games. And so I would bypass the password, install the games and play them. And then before they got home, I would reverse the changes that I made and uninstall the games and all of that and put their password back in place. And so they didn't know that I was doing it until my little sister, tattled on me because I upset her for one reason or another. And then she told them. And so they kept trying to lock me out of it. And eventually they just took the power cord because they're like, look, he doesn't have a car. He's not going to get a power cord. And so that's how they stopped me from doing that. But I've always enjoyed those kinds of things, and it was more curiosity than anything else, just always seeing what was possible. And that's just something that I've always enjoyed. And my dad was law enforcement for, 30 years and a former Marine also. And, we'd be in a store and just picking out cereal or something. And he would point and he's like, you could totally steal something right here. Look, there's no camera coverage, because he's a police officer. That's how he thinks. He's always catching the bad guys. And so he was always pointing out these things about security and how bad guys would get away with things. He would tell me the various stories, with his experience in law enforcement. And I feel like a lot of that rubbed off on me also, but in the, cybersecurity sector.
So I think it's funny that, you're breaking rules in your own house and your father's a police officer teaching you how to do.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate. He, gave me the moral compass that I have because with that curiosity, and,
is that what we call it? The moral compass?
That's what I'm sticking with. Yeah.
That's really funny. Yeah. I think it's awesome that everybody has their own experience with security, some kind of logical controls that their parents have put on them or somewhat or another, and we all have our own creative ways of bypassing them, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So now that you talked a little bit about your history of getting into pen testing, a lot of the listeners are young that we have here. How do they get involved in the pen testing community? How do they learn about this? You came from, again, one end of the spectrum. Now you're in it. You're in a dream job that so many people want to do. How does somebody get there?
Yeah, I've been asked this question a lot over the years, and I think my answer has changed too as time has gone on. When I was getting out of the Marine Corps, or actually while I was still in, and looking for a bachelor's degree program to pursue, there weren't many that had cybersecurity in the title or that specialized in that. There was like maybe information assurance, but that was kind of still more on the defense side rather than pen testing. And now, that was, maybe 10 years ago. And now there's just so many programs available from most universities that offer information security, cybersecurity, pen testing. So I feel like that's made it a lot easier for people to get in is, they could pursue a college program and get moving with it. But if, that's a little bit too much to bite off now, or maybe they're already in a career and they're just looking for a career transition, my first thing is, making sure that they have fundamental knowledge in IT. I think that that's crucial to really being able to understand these systems. You could run scripts all day long and, exploit various vulnerabilities, but unless you really have a solid understanding of just IT, just the basics. I think that that's so important. So if you don't have a lot of experience with that kind of stuff, I'd recommend, basic courses like A+, Net+, and Sec+. Those are really going to get you in the ballpark for understanding those fundamentals. And Security Plus really starts introducing you to those really critical concepts, about vulnerabilities and encryption and all of those kinds of things. And then once you have that kind of fundamental knowledge, there's a lot of vulnerable by design virtual machines that are free to jump into. And you could do this at any time, really. And if you don't know what Kali Linux is and you don't know how to use these various tools, that's okay, because there's a lot of walkthroughs available for these VMs. And using those, I don't recommend using walkthroughs. I think everybody should try to figure things out. But as your first few, as you're getting started, there's nothing wrong with using those walkthroughs as a guide and learning, okay, it's not just telling me to type this command and then I get root. No, like, what does this command do? Why am I typing it? Why would I even think to type this command? And so as long as you approach it from that angle and you learn as you go, I think that that's a really solid way to start getting your hands dirty with some cybersecurity concepts and moving on. And once you think you're ready, the OSCP is pretty much the golden standard in this industry right now for hands-on penetration testing. And that one is an excellent course. It's relatively affordable. I think that if you get 90 days of lab time, it's probably around $1,500, something like that. And that includes a certification attempt. Compare that to maybe some of those SANS courses, which can start at maybe $5,000 or $6,000. Which are great courses. Yeah. I love them, but just as a way to kind of get going without spending as much money.
Yeah, they're a lot of money.
Yeah, I like the GI Bill. That I don't know that I would have taken as many if I didn't have the GI Bill.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's one of the perks about being in the military is that you have the GI Bill to help pay for your education, which is nice. So back to the OSCP. That's like a huge test, right? You said it's the gold standard. I mean, how do you really get ready for that? I mean, you just do a bunch of vulnerable VMs and then try to exploit those, and then at what point did you say I'm ready?
Yeah, it's a really tough course. There's a lot of penetration testers that don't yet have that certification. They've been pen testing for years, maybe 5 years, and they're very good. They're very competent, and they still find the OSCP very challenging. So there's a lot of different, and then there's beginners that are able to knock it out of the park. So it just really depends on the skill sets that you have and what gaps you have in your knowledge. And I feel like a lot of the pen testers that maybe don't have as much of a background in IT or maybe development, they struggle a little bit more with the OSCP because it makes you do things manual. You're going through exploits and you're modifying them. You have to understand the programming language behind it and why things are triggering. And Offensive Security, the makers of the course, they like to troll their students quite a bit. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. Their motto is try harder. And so you'll find a system on their network and it's running a vulnerable FTP server. And you're like, oh, this is great. You search exploit database and, oh, it's a perfect match. Let's just go ahead and run this. And you run it against the system and it doesn't work. And then, that's where you see people complaining in the chats, hey, I ran this and it didn't work. I think your thing's broken. And they just say, try harder, and it makes people want to smash their heads against their desks as they're trying to figure this out. But, sometimes it's just a matter of, hey, you're using a comma and that's a character that's not allowed, or you have to encode, maybe you encode the IP address because the FTP server is running on a certain operating system version that, those are bad characters and it breaks everything. And so really being able to just dig through and figuring out why things are working or why they're not working. I don't know how to say if somebody's ready for the OSCP or not, but I think that either way, just be prepared to really dig in and, like what they say, try harder. It's not going to be something you're going to spend a couple hours on the weekend with and have in a couple of weeks. Just be prepared to really dive in and learn as much as you can as you're going through it. And there's a lot of students in there that are struggling also. And so the chat room there is a great resource for working with other students and, just brainstorming, helping each other out.
So OSCP, you got it. Now you tried harder, and I guess you won. You were winning. Now you went on to get your OSCE. What is that? I mean, I guess because you're a Marine, you like to self-inflict pain. So what's the difference between those two certifications?
Right. Yeah. Pain is weakness leaving the body, right? That's what we say. Yeah. The OSCE really takes things up a notch. It's been, let's see, about maybe 2-3 years since I got that one. And I actually have never failed a certification exam except for this one. This was the first time that I failed. I didn't make it. The final challenge was 48 hours of, straight through. I think it's 48 hours, and then you get another 24 hours for the report or something like that. And I was thinking, I'll spend a couple hours, maybe in, 8-hour work days, 12-hour work days on each of this. And then I didn't sleep. I was awake for, maybe 26 hours. And then I took a 2-hour nap and had nightmares about all the things that I was missing and why things weren't working. And it was so exhausting. And I felt like I was sick for a week after, I needed to recover from the pain, the mental exhaustion, and, 1 minute feeling like I'm on top of the world, getting the OSCP and some other things. And I'm like, man, I'm a pen tester in real life and I can't pass this. Maybe I'm like really no good. It's very humbling. So then I went back through and passed it the second time, but that one was just very challenging. In OSCP, you're running exploits and modifying them, and you even do some buffer overflows, which is really nice and a great skill set. But in the OSCE, you're custom writing shellcode, and that was something that I had no experience with. You're spending a lot more time inside of a debugger and figuring out how to change the execution flow of the various exploits that you're launching, and why or why not, why they're not working. And it was very challenging. I think that was the main thing that I remember, is just all of the time I was spending inside of a debugger, and how painful that was. And I really enjoyed that. But at the same time, I don't get to use those skills in my day-to-day roles, where I custom create exploits. I'm fuzzing applications. That's the other thing you do, is you're fuzzing applications to find vulnerabilities. And then when you're able to crash the application while fuzzing it, then you're like, okay, is this an exploitable kind of condition that I'm able to, and so sometimes you find something that crashes it, but you only have maybe, 50 characters available for your shellcode. You're like, that's not quite enough. So then you fuzz it again and you find something that maybe gives you a little bit more space to put your shellcode into. And so, yeah, it was very painful, and I remember a lot of that, and I miss it because I don't get to do that on a day-to-day basis. But I remember as I was waiting for my results, I was having nightmares, like literal nightmares of like all of the things I was, knee deep in all of this shell code and in the assembly and, in the assembly language and writing all of this stuff. And yeah, it was just, I just kept thinking of all the things that I missed and how I could have done things differently. And yeah, it was a fun time. I mean, I definitely recommend it if you want to try harder and you want to get into debuggers and assembly language. But if that's not something at all that interests you, then you probably want to stay away from it, because that's the main focus of that course.
Yeah, I'm staying away from it. I'm sweating as you're talking. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do that, much less the OSCP, because that seems like it's a very difficult time and stress that maybe I just don't need, or I'm just not capable of at the moment.
Yeah, it definitely has its place. I guess it just depends on where somebody wants to go with their career and their personal goals for knowledge. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't think it's for everybody, and I don't necessarily recommend it for everybody. So it just depends on what they're looking for.
So I've always had this question about pen testing, and I think that everybody could say that pen testing is great if you want to know what you don't know, right, in an organization. But there are some constraints that our adversaries don't see. They don't have like rules of engagement. They don't have time boxes. I mean, how does an organization really utilize a pen test to simulate an actual attack, or just in general, just to improve? What are you seeing, and what can we do better?
Sure. Well, one of the first things that come to mind there is we have pen testing, and then we have something called red teaming. And unfortunately, I feel like those two terms have gotten mixed. And red teaming is one of those buzzwords, along with the cloud and machine learning and red team. It's all, but those things really aren't the same. They shouldn't be treated as the same. Penetration testing is exactly that. You're prodding systems and trying to find exploits and vulnerabilities to exploit and all of that. Whereas red teaming really simulates more of that. APT, right? The guy that's sitting there and he's well funded and maybe he's got months to slowly prod your system without being alerted, and maybe burn a couple of IP addresses as he's doing some port scans, or maybe sending one email to one employee to try to get their creds and then waiting a couple weeks and sending another. And that's more realistic to how a lot of the the real breaches are occurring nowadays. Whereas pen testing, maybe I have 3 days, maybe I have 5 days, and that's inclusive of reporting. So it's very useful. We can find a lot of things in that time, but you're right. I mean, it's going to be very different than somebody who has a lot more time available to them to really poke and prod at the systems. So with pen testing, it's a really good starting point. I guess you could kind of break it up into tiers, like maybe vulnerability management, pen testing, and then red teaming. And I don't even recommend pen testing to companies that they don't have a vulnerability management program. They're not actively scanning their systems and seeing what holes are available. Because I could go in there and I'll rip them up with a pen test, and then they'll patch the holes that I found. But unless they're regularly addressing these things, they're just kind of spinning the wheels. They're not really making it anywhere. So once they get the vulnerability management program set up, pen testing can be really useful because we often find things that aren't, identified in vulnerability scans. That manual nature of bending the rules and changing the processes to make them work to our advantage, or phishing emails. Those kinds of things, are not addressed in that vulnerability management program. So then once an organization gets mature enough to handle pen testing, and maybe, we're coming back every year and we're like, man, we're really not finding anything because you guys are really locking things down. I think that's the time when red teaming really has a good benefit for them, when they're mature enough to handle that and understand that, hey, you're going to have exploits thrown at you that are 0 days, that are custom created for your organization. And are you able to detect those things? And if not, maybe once somebody is on a system, do you have the technology in place to say, hey, this was a weird login at 2 a.m. and, without it getting kind of lost in the noise of all of the logs that everybody's collecting all the time. Yeah.
So what do you do as far as taking these results and communicating with your customers?
Yeah, so with that, it's relatively standard now for pen testing. We'll go in there, spend whatever time we need to, and then we'll create a report that basically sorts the vulnerabilities that we identified by severity, everything from critical to low, and then maybe even informational things that aren't necessarily dangerous, but are good to know, maybe to help mitigate some things like information leakage of maybe an internal IP address, just various different things, splash pages. And so we'll try to create these proof of concepts inside of these reports, and chain the vulnerabilities that we identified together. So, maybe the top one we find is, a critical patch that's missing, or default credentials. In the side of the proof of concept, we want to be able to guide them through exactly how we did it, with screenshots, with whatever commands that we use. So that way, I'm giving it to maybe their blue team, and they're like, oh, I don't really understand this. They could follow my steps in the proof of concept that I provide to exploit the system themselves. And that's the whole idea. So that way they understand it a little bit better, and, because they might be able to apply a patch, but then once they apply the patch, it's also good for them to go back through my proof of concept and see if it's still exploitable. Because sometimes you apply the patch, but it's not necessarily what they're looking for. Or maybe they don't need a patch after all. They could just change a configuration file somewhere to, disallow whatever resource I'm trying to access. And so we try to do that, and it's also important to chain vulnerabilities together when we can. A Nessus scan will show you your highs and criticals and all of that, but it doesn't really give you the picture of, hey, because you have this as a critical and you also have this as a low and this as a medium, those things all kind of work together, or they can work together. Maybe you start with the low, and you get your first foothold in with that low vulnerability. And then that allows you to pivot elsewhere because of this medium vulnerability. And then now you're at this critical state where I have internal access to your systems. But you don't always get that full picture with vulnerability scans. And so with a pen test report and how we communicate that, we really try to stress, how in the real world these things can be used. And even if during that time box assessment, we're unable to chain things together and exploit whatever vulnerability we find, we also like to say, hey, look, maybe somebody with a little bit more time, maybe even just a couple more weeks, might have been able to leverage this to do something dangerous. Just because we weren't able to do it in the short time that we had, doesn't mean that it's not a vulnerability that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You talked a little bit about, well, you talked a lot about the technical aspects of how you communicate what you find during your pen test. How do you actually communicate that to like the senior level folks or the non-technical folks when you have to brief them? Because not all of us that are listening to the show are doing the technical piece. We need to be able to communicate effectively to leadership on the findings. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really varies depending on who you're talking to and what your target audience is. But ultimately, the executives at the top that are responsible for, making sure, like just wanting the high level results of the penetration test. That's also something that we include in the report is something called the executive summary. Mm-hmm. And that it's usually a one pager. Maybe a page and a half tops, depending on the assessment. And it's the high level summary. Hey, we came in and we assessed the internal systems or your web apps, and we found this many critical vulnerabilities. Maybe we don't even get into that, but just the high level of what we were able to accomplish during that, that week that we were working with them. And so maybe if it was a social engineering, we would just talk about, hey, we sent out 72 emails, and out of those, 10 users clicked the link, and out of those, 5 of them submitted credentials. With the credentials, we were able to access your internal network because you didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled. So we just try to break it down. And for some, that might even be a little too technical. And so then we can break it down even further by basically saying, hey, people clicked on the phishing emails, and now I'm inside your network, and here's a screenshot of, somebody's birth certificate that I found inside of the network. Mm-hmm. Just something that's got that not necessarily the wow factor, but just something that really proves the point of, hey, somebody failed the social engineering, and now I have social security numbers for 500 of your employees or clients. That's really what they need to know, depending on how high level they want the results. We try to break it down in that way, just to really focus on, I guess what I'm saying, the business impact to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Now, we've been talking a lot about pen testing and how you communicate these results. Who are some of the leaders that you try to emulate in the pen testing world, or even just in general leadership styles that you want to reflect on yourself? Who are some of these folks, and why do you like them?
Yeah, there's so many. There's just so many great examples out there, with so many people contributing freely to their, to a GitHub with all of their hard work, maybe years of research, and they're just handing these things out, handing these resources out and sharing their knowledge. I mean, that's so huge. Some of the names that come to mind, you've got Ed Scotus and John Strand, that, they did a lot of work with SANS. I know Ed's still with SANS. I think John Strand just finished up his run with them somewhat recently. Mm-hmm. But those guys, I mean, not only are they, total badasses in this industry, and just truly talented, smart minds, but maybe more importantly, they're genuinely nice guys who really just care about people, and care about organizations and care about security. And I don't know, even though I know that about them, every time I see them or see them doing something or get the opportunity to chat with them, I'm always blown away with their kindness and their wisdom and just how willing they are to help people. These are guys that are at a great position to make a lot of money and use their influence however they want. And they're not out just to make a quick buck. They're really nice guys who just really care about the state of security and transferring their knowledge to as many people as they can.
How do you use that to improve yourself as a leader and possibly a mentor?
I think it serves as a reminder to me to maybe not get so stuck in my bubble and be so selfish with my knowledge, just going somewhere, learning something and keeping it to myself. It encourages me to, whenever I have the opportunity to share my skills with other people, whether that's posting something to a GitHub or going to local, information security meetups and, just making the time to do that, where I just have to remind myself that, hey, just because this isn't going to benefit me directly, this could really make a difference in somebody's life. Maybe somebody who's just getting started in information security and they don't know how to install Kali Linux as a VM, like just sitting with them for an hour, and helping them, going through that process, that can make a really big difference. And that could help, we've got the shortage of cybersecurity professionals right now, and it's not good for anybody. And so just being able to do things to help create or help mentor, other people and foster the skill set inside of them. I think it just serves as a really good reminder for me to look at the bigger picture and not just, my career and my goals, but the industry as a whole.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure the listeners are all enjoying your experience and your knowledge that you're passing on. If you have maybe 10 seconds to pass on some final thoughts of wisdom, what would it be?
A strong passion. I mean, that's something that you're going to need in this industry. It's always changing. I think that, just keep that passion going and always improve yourself. Every single day. I know people are busy, but every day, every week, just set aside just a little bit of time just to improve yourself and, get closer and closer to your goals.
All right, my friend. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you later. And that's this week's episode of DevSecLead. I'm your host, Wilson Bautista Jr. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe, like, tell your friends. We'll talk to you next time.